Before you settle in, a warning. Some stories have a way of following you out of the dark. It started like most bad ideas, with a late night and too much curiosity. I'd been messing around on the dark web for a few weeks, not doing anything illegal, just exploring the forgotten corners of the internet. It was mostly tedious. Endless forums, weird sales pages, and more cryptocurrency talk than any sane person needed. But there's always that whisper, that promise of something genuinely hidden. I found it buried deep in a bizarre, almost ancient-looking forum dedicated to unclassified streams. The title of the thread was just The Eye of the Void, and the whole thing had maybe 3 replies over 2 years. Most of the links were dead, but one was still active. It was just a string of characters leading to a simple, low-bandwidth video feed. I clicked it, of course. Who wouldn't? The feed took a moment to load, and my first thought was disappointment. It was a fixed, grainy, colorless image, just a view of a room. A very normal room, in fact. Bare white walls, a cheap wooden desk, a swivel chair, and a single unmade bed with a dark blue comforter. There was nothing special, nothing shocking. It looked like any typical, slightly messy bedroom you'd find in a student flat or a cheap apartment anywhere in the world. I figured it was just some defunct security camera feed someone had hijacked and forgotten about. A dud. Description for an image. A person sits in a dark room, illuminated only by the glow of their laptop screen. On the screen is a grainy, black and white video feed of a very ordinary, slightly messy bedroom. The person's expression is one of mild curiosity and disappointment. I was about to close the window when something snagged my attention. On the desk, right next to the monitor, was a specific, very recognizable object. A chipped, bright orange coffee mug. I knew that mug. I'd bought it at a flea market 2 years ago because it was ugly and ridiculous, and it had a tiny chip near the rim from the time it fell onto the kitchen tile. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. I leaned closer to my screen, squinting at the grainy image. I started to look for other details. The cheap, mass-produced poster of a classic rock band taped sloppily to the wall above the bed. The exact model of the router sitting precariously on a stack of books. The pile of laundry that had been sitting in the corner for 3 days because I really needed to do a wash. It wasn't just a room. It was my room. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a hot flash of disbelief mixed with pure terror. I looked around my actual physical room, the one I was sitting in right now. Everything matched. I frantically stood up and walked over to my desk. I gently touched the orange mug. I turned back to the screen. The image didn't change, of course. It was a fixed perspective. The feed was broadcasting my room from a corner near the ceiling, a vantage point I had never considered. But there was no camera there. I ran my hands along the molding, searched the corners, peered behind the closet door. Nothing. Absolutely nothing that looked like a conventional surveillance camera. No wires, no blinking lights, no tiny lens. It was completely invisible, or at least perfectly hidden. The real horror wasn't just that I was being watched, but the implication of how they knew where I lived and had managed to install this. The dark web is supposed to be anonymous, a place for shadows. But this felt intensely personal, like an elaborate, chilling joke aimed directly at me. I sat back down, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stared at the feed. It was real time. I could see the light outside my window, subtly changing as the morning sun crept higher. Then, I decided to test it. I slowly raised my hand and waved at the corner where the camera had to be hidden. On the screen, my hand appeared, waving awkwardly. It was live. It was me. For the next few hours, I was trapped in a cycle of paranoia and investigation. I checked every smoke detector, every power outlet, every object in the room for any sign of a tiny pinhole lens. I even disassembled my old broken clock radio. Still nothing. The camera was a ghost. It defied logic. The psychological toll was immediate. Normally, I'm a slob. I toss my clothes, leave dishes out, pace while I'm on the phone. Now, every action was scrutinized, edited. When I went to change my shirt, I felt a deep, uncomfortable invasion of privacy, as if a million strangers were suddenly watching a truly mundane and boring event. I moved with a sudden, unnatural self-consciousness. I started straightening up, not because I wanted a clean room, but because I didn't want the anonymous viewers, whoever they were, to think I was a complete mess. The camera had become a silent, judgmental roommate. This gave me a terrible kind of clarity. The goal wasn't to collect sensitive data or to rob me. The goal was entertainment, a creepy, invasive form of reality TV for the worst corners of the internet. My fear, my panic, my frantic searching, that was the show. I didn't move the furniture. I kept the bookshelf firmly in place, facing the corner. I even added a small, cheap plastic plant to the top of the shelf to make the view even more mundane and boring. I deliberately went about my life in the most unremarkable way possible, giving them nothing but the back of a bookcase and the occasional glimpse of my feet shuffling past. 24 hours later, I returned to the forum. The thread was still there, but the link to the stream was dead. Clicking it led only to an error 404 page. The Eye of the Void was closed. The voyeurs had gotten bored and moved on. The relief was immense, but it didn't solve the core problem. The camera was still in my room. It hadn't vanished. It was merely powered down or disconnected from that specific broadcast link. Someone had installed a listening device, a silent, invisible witness, and I had no idea who or how, or if they had another way to turn it back on. I ended up moving out 3 weeks later. It was a massive hassle, expensive, and a complete upheaval of my life, but I couldn't sleep in that room anymore. I couldn't live in a cage where the bars were made of invisible light. Before I packed the last box, I took a baseball bat to the area where the camera was supposed to be, smashing the plaster and wood in a frantic, desperate attempt to find the hidden lens. All I found was dust and old insulation. The camera was gone, or so perfectly concealed that I simply couldn't locate it. I still use the internet, but I'm a different person now. I don't poke into the shadows anymore. The experience taught me a profound and disturbing lesson. The scariest things on the dark web aren't the large, obvious criminal enterprises. They are the tiny, personal invasions, the quiet, hidden cameras that turn a person's most private space into a disposable piece of content for bored strangers. And I'll never look at a mundane, fixed view of a room, or even my own ceiling corner, the same way again. The void, I learned, sometimes likes to look back, and the audience is always waiting. I knew I couldn't leave the feed open. It was a direct line back to my location. I copied the URL string, closed the window, and cleared my browser history with a scrubbing tool. The damage, however, was done. The knowledge that the stream existed, even if I wasn't watching it, was enough. I went back to the old forum thread using the copied URL, never accessing the main site again. I had to know if anyone else was talking about the Eye of the Void. I found a new comment, posted just an hour after I first found the stream. It was short and chilling. The new subject is active, very tidy now. Funny. They knew I had found it. They were watching my reaction. This was the moment the fear turned to cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just a subject. I was an interactable exhibit. I decided to play their game, but on my own terms. Since I couldn't find the camera, I had to treat the entire room as a public space. I taped a huge, handwritten sign to the bookcase that was now blocking the view. In thick, black marker, it read, "Hello, Dark Web. Please enjoy the view of this very boring bookshelf. If you're bored, perhaps you could tell me where your camera is?" It was a risk, a challenge, but the anonymity and the passivity were suffocating me. I needed to fight back with the only tool I had, acknowledgement. I checked the URL again the next morning. The stream was still live, a silent, grainy view of my defiance sign against the cheap wood of the bookcase. And then, a second new comment appeared in the forum, even shorter than the last. "The subject has adapted. Disappointing. Stream offline in 24 hours unless they move the furniture." It was an ultimatum. Write in the comments about what topic you would like to hear about next.